The jade bracelet hit the marble floor with a sound like thunder, splitting the heavens. For 300 years, it had never left a Whitmore woman's wrist. Today, I watched it shatter into a dozen emerald fragments, each piece catching the chandelier light like scattered stars. Evangeline. My stepmother Victoria's shriek could have woken the dead. "Have you lost your mind?" I smiled, grinding a particularly large shard beneath the heel of my designer pump. The crunch was deeply satisfying. "Actually, I think I've finally found it." My father, Harrison, stood frozen in the doorway of his study, his face the colour of old parchment. Behind him, my stepsister Delilah clutched her chest as if she were having a heart attack. The family lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, dropped his briefcase with a thud that echoed through our ancestral mansion. 300 years, my father whispered, his voice barely audible. 300 years of family history. "Gone in 3 seconds," I said cheerfully, kicking another piece across the Persian rug. Just like my inheritance was supposed to be. You see, this wasn't my first time living through this moment. In my previous life, I had stood in this very room, tears streaming down my face as my father announced that everything, the company, the properties, the investments, would go to Delilah upon his death. The ancient family tradition dictated that only blood relatives could inherit, he had explained with crocodile tears. Since I was adopted, well, I was simply out of luck. I had begged, I had pleaded, I had reminded him of every sacrifice I'd made for this family, every late night I'd spent learning the business, every social event where I'd smiled and played the perfect daughter while Delilah partied her way through Europe. None of it mattered. But that was before I discovered the truth, before I learned that my adoption was the greatest lie ever told. "Evangeline, dear?" Victoria's voice dripped with false concern as she approached me like I was a rabid animal. "You're obviously upset about the inheritance decision, but destroying priceless family heirlooms won't change anything." I laughed, a sound that made everyone in the room flinch. "Oh, Victoria, sweet, manipulative Victoria, you're absolutely right. Breaking this bracelet won't change the fact that you've been lying to everyone for 23 years. The colour drained from her face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" I pulled out my phone, scrolling to a very interesting photo. "Because I have the DNA test results right here. Turns out I'm not adopted after all. Funny how that works." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner, each second marking another moment of their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. My father sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. That's impossible. Victoria, tell her that's impossible." But Victoria couldn't speak. She was staring at my phone screen like it contained a death sentence, which, in a way, it did. "Should I read it aloud?" I asked sweetly. "Probability of paternal relationship, 99.9%. Congratulations, father. You have a legitimate heir after all." Delilah finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "But the adoption papers—" "Forged," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Every single one. Victoria here has been quite busy over the years, haven't you? It must have cost a fortune to pay off all those officials, doctors and lawyers. Though I suppose it was worth it to ensure your precious daughter inherited everything. I had spent the last 6 months of my previous life dying slowly in a hospice, my father having disowned me completely when I refused to accept my place gracefully. It was there, in those final days, that a dying nurse named Patricia had approached me with a confession that changed everything. She had been present at my birth. She had seen Victoria switch the hospital bracelets, claiming her stillborn daughter was alive and that the living baby, me, was an abandoned infant in need of adoption. The guilt had eaten at Patricia for decades, but fear of Victoria's powerful family had kept her silent. Only in her final days had she found the courage to tell the truth. I had died clutching that revelation, promising myself that if I ever got another chance, I would make them all pay. The bracelet, my father said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the scattered jade. It was supposed to go to the true Whitmore heir on her 23rd birthday. Exactly, I said, crouching down to pick up the largest fragment. And since I am the true heir, I can do whatever I want with it, including this. I stood up and walked to the massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall of the study. Without hesitation, I threw the jade piece into the flames. It landed with a satisfying crack. No! Delilah lunged forward, but I caught her wrist. Ah, I said, my grip tightening until she winced. You wouldn't want to burn yourself trying to save something that was never yours to begin with. The truth was, I had discovered something else during my investigation. The jade bracelet wasn't just a family heirloom. It was the key to a safety deposit box that contained the original will, the one my grandfather had written before Victoria's manipulations began, the one that not only named me as heir, but also contained evidence of several illegal business deals that could land both Victoria and Delilah in prison. But they didn't know that yet. Evangeline, Victoria said, her voice shaking, even if what you're saying is true, surely we can work something out. We're family. Family? I turned to face her, and whatever she saw in my expression made her take a step back. You stole my identity, my inheritance, and 23 years of my life. You made me believe I was some charity case you graciously took in out of the goodness of your hearts, and all the while, you were raising your daughter to see me as nothing more than a glorified servant. That's not, Delilah started. Isn't it? I cut her off. How many times did you remind me that I should be grateful for your family's generosity? How many times did you tell me I was lucky to have a roof over my head? How many times did you make me feel like I owed you my very existence? The memories flooded back. Every snide comment, every reminder of my place, every time I had been excluded from family traditions because I wasn't really family. The years of being told I was too emotional, too ungrateful, too much trouble. The constant gaslighting that made me question my own worth. I remember my 16th birthday, I continued, my voice growing colder with each word, when I asked why I couldn't wear the family jewellery to the debutante ball. Do you remember what you told me, Victoria? She said nothing, but her hands were trembling. You said, darling, these pieces are for blood family only. Surely you understand. And I did understand. I understood that I would never be good enough, never be worthy, never truly belong. Do you have any idea what that does to a child? Evangeline, please, my father began. No, I held up a hand. You don't get to please me, not after what you let happen. Not after you chose her lies over your own daughter's well-being. I walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds that should have been mine from birth. The gardens Victoria had redesigned, erasing every trace of my biological mother's influence. The stable where my horse had mysteriously developed a condition that required it to be put down when I was 12. The tennis court where family tournaments were held. Tournaments I was never invited to join. I have a proposition, I said, turning back to face them. I'll give you 1 week to transfer everything back to its rightful owner. The company, the properties, the investments, all of it. In return, I won't press charges for fraud, forgery, and theft. You can't be serious, Delilah gasped. This is my life, my future. No, I said quietly. It was always my life. My future, you were just borrowing it. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat nervously. Miss Whitmore, Miss Evangeline, perhaps we should discuss the legal ramifications. The legal ramifications are simple, I interrupted. Either they return what they stole, or I take them to court and let a judge decide. I have DNA evidence, forged documents, and a witness who's willing to testify from beyond the grave. I had made sure of that last part. Patricia had recorded a full confession before she died, and I had copies stored in 3 different locations. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. "You vindictive little bitch! After everything we've done for you—" "After everything you've stolen from me," I corrected. "But please, continue. I'm recording this conversation, and I'm sure a jury would love to hear your true feelings about the daughter you supposedly loved." My father stood up slowly, looking like a man who had aged a decade in the span of an hour. "The DNA test. When did you take it?" "6 months ago," I lied smoothly. I'd been having doubts about the adoption story for years. Too many inconsistencies, too many sealed records. It took some digging, but I finally found the truth. Actually, I had taken the test the day after I returned to this life, my 23rd birthday, the same day I was supposed to receive the jade bracelet and learn about my non-existent inheritance. But they didn't need to know that. "The bracelet," my father said again, staring at the remaining pieces on the floor, "was a symbol of lies," I finished. "Just like everything else in this house. But don't worry, Father. I'll make sure the family name survives this scandal. The Whitmore legacy will continue under its rightful heir." I walked toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Victoria? You might want to start looking for a good criminal defense attorney. I have a feeling you're going to need one." As I reached for the door handle, Delilah's voice stopped me. "You can't do this to us. We're your family." I turned one last time, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old pain, the desperate need for their love and acceptance that had defined my first life. But it passed quickly, replaced by something much stronger. "You're right," I said softly. "You are my family, and that makes what you did to me so much worse." I left them there, standing among the ruins of their lies, the shattered jade glittering like tears on the expensive rug. Behind me, I could hear Victoria sobbing and my father's heavy breathing. But I didn't look back. After all, I had a company to reclaim, an inheritance to collect, and 23 years of wrongs to set right. The real justice was just beginning. The elevator doors of Whitmore Industries closed with a soft ding, sealing me inside with my father's personal assistant, Margaret Hayworth. She had worked for the company for 37 years, watching 3 generations of Whitmores build their empire. Today, she couldn't stop staring at me. "Miss Evangeline," she finally whispered, "is it true? What they're saying about the adoption papers?" I adjusted my blazer and smiled. "What do you think, Margaret? You were here when I was born. You sent flowers to the hospital." Her face went white. "Dear God, I always wondered. You look so much like your grandfather when he was young. But Mrs. Victoria insisted." "Mrs. Victoria insisted on many things," I said as the elevator reached the executive floor. "Most of them lies." The doors opened to reveal the boardroom where an emergency meeting was already in session. Through the glass walls, I could see 12 board members seated around the mahogany table, their faces grave. At the head sat my father, looking like a broken man. Victoria wasn't there. Apparently she was at home with what the family doctor had diplomatically called nervous exhaustion. But Delilah was there, dressed in her sharpest business suit, playing the role of concerned heiress to perfection. "Margaret," I said softly, "before we go in, I need you to retrieve something from the archives. My grandfather's personal files from 1978. Everything should still be in his private vault." She nodded, her loyalty to the true Whitmore bloodline overriding decades of fear. "The access codes?" I smiled. "My birth date. He was always sentimental like that." As Margaret hurried away, I pushed open the boardroom doors. 12 pairs of eyes turned to me, along with one pair that held nothing but hatred. Delilah's. "Gentlemen," I said, taking my place at the table, "and lady, thank you for convening on such short notice." Board member Thomas Ashford, my father's oldest friend, cleared his throat. "Evangeline, these allegations you've made, they're quite serious. If what you're claiming is true—" "It is true," I interrupted, placing a manila folder on the table. "DNA results, hospital records, and a signed confession from Patricia Nurses, the attending nurse at my birth. She documented everything before she died." I opened the folder, revealing the documents I'd spent months gathering. Not just in this life, but in my previous one as well. Amazing what a dying woman could accomplish when she had nothing left to lose. "Furthermore," I continued, "I have reason to believe this fraud extends far beyond just my adoption. Victoria has been embezzling from the company for years, hiding it behind legitimate-looking transactions involving Delilah's various business ventures." Delilah shot to her feet. "That's a lie! How dare you—" "Sit down," I said calmly. "You'll have your chance to speak. In court—" The room fell silent except for the sound of papers rustling as the board members examined my evidence. I watched their faces change as they processed the magnitude of the deception. "There's more," I announced. "Victoria has been systematically selling off company assets to shell corporations that she and Delilah secretly own. The vineyard in Tuscany, the tech subsidiary in Silicon Valley, even the original Whitmore textile factory, all sold at below-market prices to companies that trace back to them." Board member Elizabeth Crane gasped. "The vineyard sale? But that was supposed to pay for the expansion into Asian markets." "It did pay for expansion," I said. "Victoria and Delilah's personal expansion. Check their bank records. You'll find very interesting deposits coinciding with each sale." My father's head was in his hands. "How long?" he whispered. "How long has this been going on?" I consulted my notes, though I knew every detail by heart. The first discrepancy I found dates back to when I was 12, right around the time Victoria convinced you to give her power of attorney for administrative efficiency. 11 years. 11 years of systematic theft, hidden behind a facade of family unity. In my previous life, I had died never knowing the full extent of their betrayal. This time, I had done my homework. Just then, Margaret knocked and entered, carrying a leather-bound box I recognised immediately. My grandfather's personal files. "I found these exactly where you said they'd be," she said, setting the box down in front of me. I opened it with reverent care. Inside were documents that predated Victoria's marriage to my father, files that contained the real story of the Whitmore family succession. "My grandfather was a paranoid man," I said, pulling out a thick folder. "He didn't trust banks, lawyers, or even family members completely, so he kept his own records of everything." I spread the documents across the table. Birth certificates, marriage licenses, business contracts, all in their original form, before Victoria's modifications. "This," I said, holding up a faded document, "is my original birth certificate. Note the name, Evangeline Rose Whitmore, not Evangeline Rose Whitmore Smith, as the adoption papers claimed, just Whitmore, because I was never adopted." Board member James Morrison, the company's financial advisor, spoke up. "But the hospital records from that time show what Victoria paid them to show," I finished. "But my grandfather kept his own copy of everything, including the real record of my mother's death and my birth. I had found these documents during my previous life's final days, hidden in a safety deposit box that Patricia had told me about. But I had died before I could use them. This time, I'd retrieved them the moment I woke up in my 23-year-old body. According to this," Thomas Ashford said, examining the papers, "your mother died 3 hours after giving birth. Natural complications from a difficult labour." "Yes," I said softly, "and Victoria, who had suffered a stillbirth just days earlier, saw an opportunity." She convinced the grieving hospital staff that it would be a kindness to let the orphaned baby be adopted by a loving family, namely hers. The room was dead silent. I could see the board members processing the implications. Not just the personal betrayal, but the legal ramifications for the company. Delilah, I said, turning to my stepsister, would you like to explain to the board how you've been using company funds to support your lifestyle? The penthouse in Manhattan, the yacht, the gambling debts in Monaco. Her face was the colour of ash. I don't know what you're talking about. I smiled and pulled out another folder. Bank statements, credit card records, even some interesting photographs from your recent trip to Las Vegas, where you lost $300,000 in a single night. Company money, of course. That's impossible, she whispered. Those accounts are private. Were private, I corrected. But when you're suspected of corporate fraud, privacy becomes a luxury you can't afford. I have friends in very useful places. Actually, I had hired a private investigator the moment I returned to this life. Money well spent, considering what he'd uncovered. The board needs to understand, I continued, that this isn't just about my inheritance. This is about a pattern of criminal behaviour that has cost this company millions of dollars and put every shareholder at risk. Elizabeth Crane was furiously taking notes. What are you proposing? I stood up, walking to the windows that overlooked the city my grandfather had helped build. I'm proposing that we clean house, complete transparency, full audit and criminal charges for everyone involved. You can't do this, Delilah said desperately. Even if everything you're saying is true, the scandal will destroy the company. Stock prices will crash, investors will flee. The scandal will destroy the corruption, I said firmly. The company will survive. It survived worse. I turned back to the board. I'm also proposing a complete restructuring of management. Effective immediately, I'll be taking my rightful place as majority shareholder and CEO. That's... Thomas started, then stopped. Actually, that's exactly what your grandfathers will specified. If the true heir ever came forward... The true heir has come forward, I said, and she's not very happy about what she's found. My father finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Evangeline, I need you to know that I never suspected. Victoria told me you were adopted before we even got married. I thought I was giving an orphan a home. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old pain, the desperate need for his approval, his love, but I pushed it down. That's the tragedy, isn't it? You believed her lies so completely that you never questioned them. Not even when I begged you to see me as your real daughter. What do you want from us? He asked quietly. I returned to my seat, spreading my hands on the table. I want what was stolen from me, my name, my inheritance, my family legacy. I want Victoria and Delilah prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and I want this company restored to its former integrity. And if we refuse? Delilah asked, though her voice was shaking. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. Then I go public with everything. The adoption fraud, the embezzlement, the shell corporations, the gambling debts, all of it. I wonder how the media will react to the story of the heiress who stole her own sister's identity. The board members exchanged glances. The choice was clear. Cooperate with me, or watch the company burn in the resulting scandal. I'll need a formal vote, I said, all in favour of accepting the evidence and beginning immediate proceedings to restore the rightful heir. One by one, hands rose around the table. Even my father, broken as he was, raised his hand. Delilah was the only holdout. Motion carried, I said. Margaret, please have security escort Miss Delilah from the building. She's no longer employed here. As security led my sputtering stepsister away, I gathered my documents. Phase 1 was complete, but I wasn't finished yet. After all, I still had a stepmother to deal with. Victoria was waiting for me in the mansion's conservatory, surrounded by her prized orchids. She sat perfectly upright in a white wicker chair, every inch the composed socialite despite the chaos erupting around her. Her manicured fingers traced the rim of a teacup, and for a moment she looked almost serene. "I wondered when you'd come," she said without looking up. "Though I expected you sooner." I stepped into the glass-walled room, breathing in the humid air, thick with the scent of exotic blooms. "I had business to attend to. Your daughter needed to be escorted from the premises." That got her attention. Victoria's head snapped up, her carefully applied makeup doing little to hide the strain around her eyes. "Delilah, what did you do to her?" "Nothing she didn't do to herself," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Though I suspect you're more concerned about what I've done to your financial arrangements." Victoria's laugh was brittle as glass. "You think you've won something, don't you? You think exposing a few business transactions will somehow erase 23 years of history?" "I think," I said carefully, "that you're about to discover just how deep your hole actually is." I pulled out my phone and played a recording. Victoria's own voice filled the conservatory, crystal clear and damning. The Whitmore girl must never know the truth, if she ever finds out what really happened at the hospital. Victoria's teacup clattered against its saucer. "Where did you get that?" "Your private study," I said. "Specifically, the antique desk where you thought you'd hidden your insurance policy. You really should have invested in better security." The recording continued, revealing conversations between Victoria and various accomplices over the years. Doctors who'd falsified records, lawyers who'd forged documents, even the private investigator she'd hired to eliminate any traces of the truth. "You see, Victoria, while you were busy playing the grieving stepmother today, I was in your study. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look." I had broken into that study during my previous life, desperate and dying, searching for any proof of the truth Patricia had revealed. I'd found the recordings then, hidden in a secret compartment behind her father's portrait, but I died before I could use them. This time, I'd walked straight to them the moment I left the boardroom. "The most interesting recording," I continued, "is the one where you discuss your arrangement with Dr. Morrison. You remember Dr. Morrison, don't you? The one who declared your stillborn daughter alive and my very living self abandoned." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You little bitch! Do you have any idea what you've cost me? What you've cost your sister?" "My sister is dead," I said flatly. "She died 23 years ago when you smothered her in the hospital and put her bracelet on me." The words hung in the air like poison. Victoria's face went dead white. "That's right," I continued. "I know about the bracelet switch too. Your daughter was born wearing a medical ID bracelet because of her heart condition. When she died, you put it on me and told the nurses I was the sick baby who needed special care. Clever, really. It explained why I looked different from you, why I had different blood type, why I never quite fit in." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the tile floor. "You don't understand. You couldn't possibly understand what it's like to lose a child." "You're right," I said, rising to face her. "I understand what it's like to have your entire identity stolen, to be raised believing you're unwanted, unloved, unworthy, to spend your whole life trying to earn affection from people who see you as nothing more than a convenient lie." I walked to one of her prize orchids, a rare white phalaenopsis that she'd spent years cultivating. With deliberate care, I snapped the stem. 23 years, I said, crushing the delicate petals between my fingers. "That's how long you've been living a lie. How long you've been stealing my life to give to your daughter." "Stop," Victoria whispered, watching in horror as I moved to the next orchid. "Why?" I asked, breaking another stem. These flowers mean something to you. They represent years of careful cultivation, patient nurturing, devoted care. Snap! Another orchid fell. Now imagine if someone stole them from you and told the world they'd grown them. Imagine if they were praised for your work while you were forgotten. Imagine if they destroyed what you loved most and then demanded gratitude for their generosity. Victoria lunged forward, trying to stop me, but I caught her wrist. "Don't touch what isn't yours," I said softly. "You taught me that lesson very well." I released her and continued my systematic destruction of her beloved collection. Each broken flower was a year of my stolen life, a moment of pain I'd endured, a piece of my soul that had withered under her lies. "Please," Victoria sobbed, "stop this. I'll do anything. I'll confess. I'll return the money. You'll what?" I turned to face her, my hands covered in crushed petals. "You'll suddenly develop a conscience. You'll magically undo decades of psychological abuse. You'll resurrect your dead daughter and give me back my real family." Victoria collapsed into her chair, her perfect facade finally crumbling completely. "What do you want from me?" I smiled, pulling out one final document from my jacket. "I want you to sign this." It was a confession, typed and ready for signature. Every crime, every lie, every stolen dollar laid out in legal detail. "Sign it," I said, "and I'll make sure you're transferred to a minimum security facility. Refuse, and I'll ensure you're tried for kidnapping, fraud, embezzlement, and accessory to murder." "Murder?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. "Patricia nurses," I said. "The nurse who knew the truth? She didn't die of natural causes, did she? Those sleeping pills she supposedly overdosed on, where did she get them? Who visited her the day before she died?" The colour drained from Victoria's face so completely I thought she might faint. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The security cameras at the nursing home say otherwise. Amazing how long they keep their footage when you know the right people to ask." I leaned forward. "You visited Patricia 3 times in her final week. Each time you brought her favourite chocolates. Very thoughtful. Tell me, Victoria, what was in those chocolates?" The confession fell from Victoria's trembling hands. She stared at me with the look of a trapped animal, finally understanding that I knew everything. "How?" she whispered. "How did you find out?" "Because I was there," I said simply. "In my previous life, I was dying in that same nursing home. I saw you visit Patricia. I saw how scared she became after you left. I watched her die, knowing she'd been silenced before she could tell the truth." Victoria's eyes widened. "Previous life? You're insane." "Am I?" I picked up the confession and placed it in front of her again. "Or am I the only one in this family who's finally seeing clearly?" I pulled out a pen and set it beside the paper. "Sign it, Victoria. It's over." For a long moment, she just stared at the document. Then, with shaking hands, she picked up the pen. "You know," she said, her voice hollow, "I did love you in my own way. You were such a bright, eager little girl, always trying so hard to please everyone." "You loved controlling me," I corrected. "You loved having a grateful victim who would never question your authority." Victoria signed her name with deliberate care, each letter sealing her fate. When she finished, she looked up at me with something that might have been respect. "What happens now?" she asked. I folded the confession and tucked it safely into my jacket. "Now you wait for the police. They should be here within the hour." As if summoned by my words, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. Victoria closed her eyes. "And Delilah?" "We'll learn what it's like to earn her own way in the world," I said, assuming she avoids prison for her part in all this. The sirens were at the gate now. Through the glass walls of the conservatory, I could see red and blue lights flashing across the gardens. Victoria opened her eyes one last time. You've destroyed everything I built." "No," I said, standing to leave. "I've finally built something of my own." The police were knocking at the front door. I could hear Margaret letting them in, her voice calm and professional as she directed them toward the conservatory. But before they could arrive, I had one more stop to make. The family crypt was waiting. The Whitmore family crypt stood like a marble monument to generations of lies, its Gothic spires piercing the evening sky. I walked through the iron gates with deliberate steps, my heels clicking against the stone pathway that led to the heart of our family's darkest secrets. Behind me, the mansion blazed with police lights, but here in the cemetery, only moonlight illuminated my path. I had one final truth to uncover, one last deception to expose. The heavy bronze door of the crypt swung open with surprising ease. Someone had been here recently. The hinges were well oiled, the lock freshly cleaned. I pulled out my phone's flashlight and descended into the marble chamber where 4 generations of Whitmores lay in eternal rest. Or so I had always believed. I walked past my grandfather's tomb, past my great-grandmother's ornate sarcophagus, until I reached the far wall where a small plain marker bore a name that had haunted me for months. Baby Whitmore, beloved daughter, born and died, March 15th. My supposed date of birth, the day Victoria claimed her daughter had died, and I had been adopted. But as I knelt beside the small grave, something felt wrong. The marble was too clean, too new, the engravings too sharp for something allegedly 23 years old. I pulled out the small pry bar I'd brought and began working at the edges of the marker. It came loose far too easily, revealing not an ancient burial chamber, but a shallow depression containing a single metal box. My hands trembling, I opened it. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. Real adoption papers. Not the forged ones Victoria had shown the world, but genuine legal documents dated just 2 years ago. Documents that bore a very different story. My name wasn't Evangeline Whitmore. It was Evangeline Morrison. And according to these papers, I had been adopted not as a baby, but as a 21-year-old woman recovering from a traumatic brain injury. The memories hit me like a physical blow. Not memories from a previous life, but suppressed memories fighting their way back to the surface. A car accident on a rainy night, waking up in a hospital with no memory of who I was. A kind woman named Victoria claiming to be my loving stepmother, telling me I'd suffered amnesia from the crash. "Hello, Evangeline." I spun around to find Victoria standing in the crypt doorway, but this wasn't the broken woman I'd left in the conservatory. This Victoria was calm, composed, and holding a gun. "Or should I say, hello, Dr. Evangeline Morrison," she continued, stepping into the chamber. "Though I suppose you prefer the name I gave you?" My mind reeled as the last pieces fell into place. You kidnapped me." "Kidnapped is such an ugly word," Victoria said, moving closer. "I prefer to think of it as recruitment. You were so lost, so broken after that accident. Your real family had already given up on you, written you off as a vegetable. But I saw potential." The gun gleamed in the moonlight. "You see, my real daughter, my biological daughter, was indeed gifted. Brilliant, beautiful, destined for greatness. But she was also reckless. She died in a skiing accident when she was 19. Leaving me with nothing but debts and disappointment." I backed away, my mind frantically processing this new reality. "So you found a replacement?" "I found you," Victoria smiled. "Dr. Evangeline Morrison, youngest neurosurgeon to ever graduate from Johns Hopkins. Even with your brain injury, you retained most of your medical knowledge, your sharp intellect, your drive for success. You were perfect. The pieces of my stolen life rearranged themselves into a horrifying new picture. The company, the business acumen I thought was inherited, was yours all along," Victoria confirmed. "I simply redirected it, gave you a new identity, a new purpose, made you believe you were fighting for a family legacy when you were actually building my empire. I thought of all the late nights I'd spent studying business strategies, the innovative ideas I'd brought to Whitmore Industries, the acquisitions I'd orchestrated. It had all been my own expertise, my own brilliance, stolen and repackaged. The DNA test, I whispered. How did you falsify it? Victoria laughed. Please, after 2 years of planning this elaborate charade, do you think I'd let something as simple as genetics expose me? I have contacts in every laboratory in the state. The recording device in my pocket felt heavy with the weight of her confession. But Victoria seemed to read my thoughts. Oh, and if you're thinking of recording this little revelation, I'm afraid your phone mysteriously stopped working about 10 minutes ago. She held up a small electronic device. Signal jammer. Very effective. My blood ran cold as I realised the full scope of her manipulation. The nurse, Patricia, she wasn't a witness to my birth. She was your attending physician after the accident, Victoria finished. She knew exactly who you were, and more importantly, who you weren't. When she started developing a conscience in her final days, well, let's just say she received more than chocolates during my visits. I was trapped in a marble tomb with a mad woman who had stolen not just my identity, but my entire life. Everything I thought I knew about myself was a lie. I wasn't a Whitmore heiress reclaiming her birthright. I was a kidnapped doctor who had spent 2 years unknowingly building my captor's fortune. But here's the beautiful irony, Victoria continued, her gun steady in her manicured hands. You played your part so perfectly. The righteous anger, the methodical revenge, the systematic destruction of everything I'd built. You even brought me the evidence I needed to eliminate the last loose ends. My father, Delilah, the board members, they weren't my family. They were innocent people I'd manipulated and destroyed based on manufactured evidence. The real Harrison Whitmore died 6 months ago, Victoria said casually. Natural causes, thankfully. That man you've been calling father is actually James Henderson, an actor I hired to play the role. Quite convincing, don't you think? The man who had raised his hand to vote against me, who had looked so broken when I accused him of betraying his own daughter. He had been trying to protect an innocent woman from a madwoman's scheme. And Delilah, I asked, though I dreaded the answer. My real stepdaughter? Harrison's child from his first marriage. Completely innocent of any wrongdoing, just as confused by this whole charade as you were. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp, though I suspect she won't be confused much longer, given that she's currently being arrested for crimes she didn't commit. The magnitude of my manipulation hit me like a physical blow. I had destroyed innocent people, convinced I was seeking justice. I had been the villain of this story all along. Why? I whispered. Why go through all this? Because, my dear, you were never going to be content as a simple amnesiac. Your mind was too sharp, too suspicious. Eventually, you would have started asking questions, digging into your past. So I gave you a past, a tragic, compelling past that would explain away any inconsistencies and focus your brilliant mind on revenge instead of truth. Victoria moved closer, the gun trained on my heart. And now that you've served your purpose, destroyed the real Whitmore family, consolidated the company under my control, and eliminated all the witnesses, it's time for the final act. You're going to kill me. I'm going to allow you to tragically take your own life, she corrected, overcome with guilt upon discovering the truth about your actions. The suicide note has already been written, in your own handwriting, naturally. 2 years of practice made that quite easy. But as Victoria raised the gun, I smiled. There's just one problem with your perfect plan. Oh? I held up a small device I'd palmed from the bronze box. You're not the only one who believes in insurance policies. The device was a recording chip, its red light blinking steadily. Every word of Victoria's confession had been captured in crystal clear audio. Impossible, Victoria breathed. The signal jammer? Blocks transmissions, not recordings, I said, backing toward the crypt's entrance. Did you really think a neurosurgeon wouldn't understand basic electronics? Victoria's face twisted with rage as she realised her mistake. It doesn't matter. No one will ever hear that recording. She pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the marble chamber like thunder, but I was already diving behind my grandfather's tomb. The bullet chipped stone inches from my head. You can't run forever, Evangeline, Victoria shouted, moving to pursue me. But I wasn't running. I was remembering. Not false memories of a stolen childhood, but real memories of medical training, of emergency procedures, of life and death situations where quick thinking meant survival. As Victoria rounded the tomb, I was waiting with a heavy marble urn raised above my head. Years of surgical precision guided my strike as the urn connected with her wrist, sending the gun spinning across the floor. Victoria screamed, clutching her shattered wrist, but her eyes burned with undiminished hatred. You think this changes anything? You're still nothing, still a broken, forgotten woman with no family, no identity, no future. I picked up the gun, my hand steady despite everything. You're wrong about one thing, Victoria. I do have an identity. I pulled out my real phone, the one I'd hidden in my jacket lining, the one that had been live streaming our entire conversation to a secure server. My name is Dr. Evangeline Morrison, I said, looking directly into the camera, and I'm very much alive. The sound of sirens filled the night air, but this time they were coming for the right person. Within minutes, the crypt was flooded with police officers, paramedics, and FBI agents who had been watching my live stream. As they led Victoria away in handcuffs, she turned back one final time. You'll never be free of this. You'll never know who you really are. But as I watched her disappear into the night, I realised she was wrong. For the first time in 2 years, I knew exactly who I was. A survivor. And tomorrow I would begin the long journey of reclaiming my real life, starting with freeing the innocent people I had wrongfully accused, and finding my way back to the family that had never stopped looking for their missing daughter. The Whitmore name would die tonight, but Dr. Evangeline Morrison was finally coming home.